I didn't go back to Nigeria because I was adventurous. I went because I was broke, almost evicted, and unemployment was breathing down my neck like a debt collector with stamina. So, when an offer appeared for a cathodic protection inspector with overseas technical services in Warri, Nigeria, on something proudly described as a turnkey contract, I grabbed it like a life raft, even though it was clearly leaking. I arrived to discover that the corrosion control industry had been frozen in time. Not just behind the curve, embalmed. The entire philosophy of cathodic protection could be summed up in one magical number: negative 850 millivolts. If the meter said anything more negative than that, everybody relaxed. Pipelines? Protected. Reality? Optional. I was assigned to the corrosion control section of Shell's maintenance department. My supervisor, Tony Emeghara, handed me a slip of paper, literally a slip, like something you get with dry cleaning, and said, "These are your duties." They were ambitious. Inspect and report on existing installations. Upgrade the system. Train local staff in the latest technology. Computerize the cathodic protection records. This was optimistic, given that my living conditions were so unsafe that I was ambushed by armed robbers, which really puts Excel spreadsheets into perspective. On my first inspection of the section, I found about 20 staff and contractors whose sole mission in life was to worship the negative 850 millivolt reading. That was it. No curiosity, no nuance, no understanding, just volts and vibes. I quickly discovered a small problem. I had no meter. My service company had not supplied one. When I asked the department staff for a meter, there was a long pause, followed by a scavenger hunt that took over an hour. Eventually, they located the meter, singular, along with the electrode. These priceless artefacts were in the possession of a contractor's technician called Priscilla. This was apparently the only working meter in the entire section. The rest, I was told, were either completely broken or in for repair, which in Nigeria could mean anything from waiting for parts to lost sometime during the last decade. Priscilla told me she was scheduled to take readings at Sapele West Flow Station, so I joined her. She drove for 2 hours, took about 15 voltage readings, and that was her entire day's work. She took the measurements with the cathodic protection system on, placed the electrode wherever it felt right at the time, and wrote the numbers down confidently. When I showed her that simply moving the electrode a few inches produced completely different readings, she looked genuinely shocked. She explained that she had just been shown what to do and had done it ever since. She was a qualified engineer, but nobody had ever explained what the measurements actually meant. This was was not an isolated case. I went out with other technicians and engineers and noticed a recurring theme. Everyone had to borrow the same meter. One day, work was cancelled entirely because they couldn't find the electrode. Not broken, just missing. Back at the office, there were filing cabinets, plural, stuffed with records. They were chaotic, incomplete and inconsistent. Twice a year, a major survey was carried out by contractors and delivered as thick bound books that looked very impressive and were put on a shelf. Unfortunately, made very little sense and contradicted themselves regularly. One thing I noticed immediately: there were no records of off readings. When I asked about this, Tony eventually showed me an advisory note from Shell International stating that only off potentials were acceptable for assessing cathodic protection. Apparently this memo had existed for some time. Tony arranged for me to speak with the Lagos advisor, a Dutchman called Hans Erlings, who was trying valiantly and alone to push this idea forward, that is, the off potential readings. Hans came to Rapelli Flow Station, where I demonstrated that even when off potentials were measured, serious errors remained. After a long discussion, he asked me to write procedures to eliminate these errors. I didn't mention the Alexander cell at that moment. Hans was extremely conventional, and I didn't want to introduce an immediate cardiac arrest. I did, however, give him copies of my paper, along with work by Jim Gosden and Dr. Prince. Then something unexpected happened. Maintenance 1, Matthew Omre, became interested. He visited the site, watched the demonstrations, and immediately asked me to run a seminar for the staff, which he attended himself. This was a problem for the resistance brigade, who preferred the comfort of negative 850 volts and denial. Despite strong opposition, Matthew authorised a pilot survey and excavation at Rapelli Flow Station. With his permission, I used the Alexander cell alongside conventional methods and an arrangement suggested by Dr. Prince, which I called the isopotential cell. I involved as many staff and contractors as possible, ensuring that there were plenty of witnesses when reality arrived. A professor from Benin University, on sabbatical with Shell Warri, joined us, which added academic weight and made it harder for anyone to pretend that nothing was happening. The results were awkward. Every conventional monitoring method showed that cathodic protection had not been achieved for the past 20 years. The professor confirmed that the soil was extremely corrosive. A short section of pipe found in the backfill confirmed this because it was badly corroded. Only the Alexander cell showed that cathodic protection was actually stopping corrosion at that location. When we excavated the pipeline, we found a coating fault. and the metal beneath was as new. Once again, the Alexander cell was right. About a month later, a serious leak occurred on the delivery pipeline from Batan flow station to the trunk line manifold. According to records, this pipeline had always met the cathodic protection criteria. My off-potential measurements also looked fine. The Alexander cell, however, showed that cathodic protection was not preventing corrosion there. There was a long history of leaks at Sapperley West. I was asked to design a remedial system and soon realised that enormous sums of money were changing hands for clean-up and repairs. I became aware that at least one incident had been completely bogus. I informed Matthew of my suspicions. He listened carefully, then gently suggested that I might want to let the matter rest. Whilst computerising cathodic protection records, I uncovered something even worse. Gross inaccuracies, inconsistencies, and clear evidence that many readings had simply been invented. Most of the contracts from the past 10 years were effectively worthless. So, I designed a data entry system that made it impossible to submit false readings without being exposed immediately. When it was introduced, the contractor suddenly became more honest. An impressive technological breakthrough. Later, Godwin eBay joined from Port Harcourt and became my immediate supervisor. He had witnessed the Alexander cell and already knew of it from other corrosion engineers. He asked me to propose a full condition monitoring project using all available methods. He and Matthew signed it. Management approved it. At the same time, they completed paperwork to engage me as a consultant rather than an inspector. That's when Overseas Technical Services blocked it. What followed was predictable corporate scuffle, and in the middle of it, I resigned. I left behind filing cabinets of fiction, pipelines that told uncomfortable truths, and one very tired negative 850 volt myth.